Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Okay, so hi everybody. This is going to be a demonstration on how to onboard both AWS and Azure accounts operating from the free trial of CloudGuard CSPM, and then running some of the free rule sets we have to generate a report that we can then hand off to the customer or discuss with the customer about. So the first step we need to do is we actually need to create a CloudGuard account. To do that, you can just navigate to secure.dome9.com. That's going to bring you to this splash page here. In order to create an account, we just follow this link here. Once we've done that, we can simply paste in our business email. This isn't going to work for Gmail emails or Yahoo emails or MSN emails. We need a business email here, confirm you're not a robot and submit it. Then you will get a link in your email that will allow you to set the password for your free trial. Now, after that information is inputted and we've received that email and created our own CloudGuard tenant, we'll be able to log into it using that email that we utilized in the sign-on and then the password we created from our email. After that, we're able to log into the platform. And mine's going to look a little different here because I've already onboarded a bunch of AWS and Azure accounts as well as a couple other things. But what the customer is going to see right here is basically a bunch of zeros, right? They're going to see 0 AWS, Azure, GCP, Kubernetes accounts onboarded with 0 total protected assets. Now, in order to onboard one of these accounts, we need to follow the following instructions here. So first, we need to go to the Assets tab on the left-hand side of the screen here. It's going to bring us to our Environments page. And from here, we simply click Add New. So when we select this option here, we have the ability to onboard an AWS account or an Azure subscription. And to do that, we just simply click on these links. Now, I'll go through each different method of onboarding, right? And with each different public cloud provider in this case, but they're all really doing the same things, basically granting CloudGuard read-only access to their different cloud entities housed within these particular environments. So in this case, we'll start with AWS, and then we'll move on to Azure, and then I'll talk about how to run compliance assessments against both of those particular environments. So for AWS, we'll select AWS environment, and we have 2 operational modes here. Now, in our case, we're just going to be focusing on the read-only mode. We're just looking to generate these compliance reports, pass them off to the customer so that they can glean some information about their compliancy according to our best practices. It's important to note that this will work for AWS GovCloud environments or AWS China environments, depending on which flavor the customer is operating in. Now, we're always going to be operating from this read-only mode, so we'll click Get Started here. And this will bring us to the next page where we're going to be creating an IAM policy, a custom policy provided by Checkpoint. And you can see here, we'll give you full instructions on how to exactly do this, but basically we need to log into the AWS console, go to the IAM service, and create a policy. Now we'll select the JSON tab once we're in that Create Policy menu and simply copy and paste this particular policy document. Now, what are we requesting for access? Basically, a bunch of list actions against various services within AWS. You can see here it's going to be a lot of list and describe actions, maybe against our Kinesis service or against the AWS network firewall or against our S3 bucket service, basically giving us the ability to list and provide you all of this information within the console here. So I'll click close out of this, but basically how it would operate is you'd copy this to your clipboard, and then you'd simply paste it in the JSON tab of the IAM service create policy menu within AWS. Now, once we pasted that into the IAM service, we simply click review policy. We give it a name, which can be CloudGuard read-only policy, or you can really name it whatever you want. That's not going to affect anything here. Now, after we've created that custom policy within AWS, we'll simply click next. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a role comprised of 2 individual policies. One of those policies being the policy we just created, right? So in this case, we'll go to the roles section of the IAM service, select a role type, and that will be another AWS account with a external ID. Now we are going to provide you with this external ID. We're going to paste the following right here, this account ID and this external ID, and make sure we don't check require MFA for this particular role. We're going to paste all this information into AWS and then click next so we can go to the permissions option. Now, a role is just a bunch of policies grouped together, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to add the security audit AWS managed policy, giving us read access to all the services not covered in the custom policy we created earlier. So we're combining the CloudGuard read-only policy with the security audit policy that's provided from AWS and creating a role out of those two policies. After we've done that, we'll simply click Next within AWS, give it a role name. We can call it CloudGuard Connect. We can call it CloudGuard Role. That's not going to really change anything, right? After we've created that role will have a unique ARN, which is just an identifier from AWS to identify a unique asset. And all we really have to do is take that role ARN from AWS and paste it into here. And since we've already taken the external ID and pasted it into AWS in step 3 here, we're done. We simply give it a display name. We can call it Jake's AWS account after we pasted that role ARN in that field. And then we can click Next and we're done. That is the process of onboarding a AWS account into the CloudGuard platform. And so now we'll move on to Azure, which is really going to be a very similar process, just using different terminology. So let's hop over there. To get back to where we were, I'll simply click this Environments tab up here. Remember, we're still in the Assets module. And from here, I'll click Add New once again, but instead of clicking AWS Environment, I'll select Azure Subscription. So after selecting this, we'll get to a very similar page where we have both a read-only operational mode and a manage, which is essentially a read-write mode. This is available in Azure Gov and Azure China. So if those customers are using those flavors of Azure, they'll still be able to onboard their subscriptions into this platform. And we're going to be operating from a read-only perspective, right? Because all we're trying to do is generate those compliance reports for the customer. So let's click Get Started here. From here, all we have to do in Azure, it's very, very simple. So instead of using roles, what we're going to use is app registrations. So we'll log into our Azure Management Portal, just at portal.azure.com, navigate to the app registration service, and select Create New Registration. From there, we'll give it a name. We can call it CloudGuard Connect. We can call it CloudGuard Azure Connect. Once again, the name of these things doesn't really matter, but what does matter is under our redirect URI, we need to have secure.dome9.com set as a URL. After we've done that, we register the application registration. Once we've registered it, Azure will give us an application ID. We simply paste that application ID in this field. It'll look something like this, basically a jumble of numbers and letters. And then we generate a secret that we can share with CloudGuard to give it access to our environment. So in the app registration page, we'll be able to select that application that we just made. Maybe we named it CloudGuard Connect or something else. Select certificates and secrets in the menu within Azure. It'll look like that. Fill in the description and expiration period for that particular secret and click Add. And we'll only have one time to view this secret key, right? But once we've created that secret key, we'll be able to paste that information in here. So it would look something like this, right? And then we'd be able to click Next. And then the next portion here, we need to actually integrate with Azure Active Directory. This is going to give us the ability to capture that control plane information in Azure, as well as do things like single sign-on through Azure AD, as well as many other things that we can get to at a later date. So we'll go to the Azure Active Directory service, select properties from there, copy the tenant ID that represents our Azure AD, and paste the tenant ID within here. And then from there, we go to subscriptions and we decide which subscription we want to onboard, right? So this is done on a subscription by subscription basis so that we can run certain compliance assessments against certain subscriptions and certain compliance assessments against others. Now, much in the same way that we needed to give that role in AWS the IAM privileges to be able to read into our environment, we need to do that same thing, but we need to do it for the application registration. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the IAM menu within our subscription, select Add, and we're going to add a role assignment. So this is a set of permissions that is provided from Azure, and we'll add the reader role to it. You can look at the details of what Azure is providing within the reader role, but really it's just read-only access to all of your different Azure services within one particular Azure subscription. Now, after we've done that, after we've added the role assignment of the reader role to that application, we simply save it. And then we add some extra API permissions on top of that. And those are going to be the directory read all API permission and the reports read all API permission. After we've done that, after we've plugged in our tenant ID and our subscription ID, we can simply click next. And we'll get to the naming stage where we basically say what we want this Azure account to be named. We could call it our Azure main subscription. And after that, we'll go to the organizational unit and we can add our Azure account to any of these organizational units within our Dome9 platform here. Now that's the entire process. If I was actually going to onboard this, I'd click finish here and we'd be all done. So that covers the onboarding process for both Azure and AWS. Now let's move on to really the meat of this, right? So once we have our accounts onboarded, we'll be able to see information within the overview page here. We'll see, we have one AWS account and one Azure subscription. We'll be able to see some of those assets right after we onboard. Now it's best practice to wait between 15 to 20 minutes to be able to allow for CloudGuard to consume all that information within our various accounts and populate it here. So once the onboarding process is done for either AWS or Azure or both, give it about 15 or 20 minutes to make all those API calls to the different service endpoint APIs, and we'll be able to populate that information within this dashboard. Now, like I said, the most important part of this is to be able to run those compliance assessments. And we're going to be doing that from the posture management section here. So we have the ability to run compliance assessments in an ad hoc mode, right? In the free version, the only rule set we'll be able to run is this CloudGuard best practices. So all of these will be grayed out, but we can still run this CloudGuard best practices rule set. Now, if we want to get notified of the results of these compliance assessments, we'll need to set up some type of continuous posture so that these assessments are being run continuously and we're being notified of their misconfigurations. So in order to do that, we'll go to the continuous posture tab here and we'll add a new policy. And I'll do this for both AWS and Azure, but it's going to be a nearly identical procedure. So from the continuous posture tab here under the posture management module, we'll hop over here to add policy. And in this case, we're just going to do it by environment, right? We're going to tie one environment to a compliance rule set and then get notified of those misconfigurations in some manner. So I'll click environment policy here. This will bring me up to a new menu where I simply select my platform. We'll start with AWS and then we'll move over to Azure. So in this case, I already have Amazon Web Services selected here. So I'll click next. And let's say I onboarded my AWS prod account, right? I have a bunch of different AWS accounts onboarded into this particular tenant, but the customer will most likely have one or two onboarded after we completed the onboarding procedures. So let's say I onboarded that AWS prod account and I want to see how compliant that is according to our best practices. So I'll select this AWS prod account here. You can see the AWS account number here as well, and I'll click next. From here, I need to identify the rule set that I want to run against this particular environment continuously. Now, I know that it's called CloudGuard Best Practices, so I locate that AWS CloudGuard Best Practices here, and I select it. So now I have one environment, my AWS prod account, tied to the CloudGuard Best Practices rule set that we can see here. Now I click Next, and I simply choose how I want to be notified of these non-compliant findings. So I'll select the Add Notification button here, and I'll give it a name. I'll call it CloudGuard Best Practices Rule Set, and I'll add that to this description as well. And we can opt to send these scheduled reports by email, right? So we can include all the alerts in the Alerts console, which is located here under Events. Or we can just send out emailed scheduled reports as well. And we can do this on a daily, a weekly, a monthly, or a custom basis. Now I'll select weekly here. They come in every Monday at 7 a.m. and they can go to individual email addresses. So it could be customer@customer.com. It could even be me. It could send it to me as well, or possibly a distribution list. Now, after that's completed, we've added our emails to the scheduled report, gave our notification a name and a description, and set the time period with which we want to see these scheduled reports. We can either see these in a more detailed format, basically breaking it down rule by rule, or a summary, which is going to be more of an executive summary level report. I'll click Save here. And now I have that CloudGuard best practices notification as well. And it's going to be automatically tied to this particular continuous compliance policy because I just created it here. So just as a review, we selected AWS as our platform. We decided we wanted to monitor AWS prod, and we tied AWS prod to that CloudGuard best practices rule set. And then we decided to get notified through a notification with the same name. Now, this particular notification here, if we remember, is just sending out scheduled reports to a list of emails that can be within our company, that can be outside our company, that can be a distribution list within that company, whatever we decide here for the notification. After we've done that, we simply click Save, and then we'll get that report based on the time period we selected within that particular notification. And we'll also see it under here in the Continuous Posture tab, under the CloudGuard best practices. So you can see I have AWS prod here, and I have that CloudGuard best practices rule set notification. This signifies that AWS prod is tied to this particular rule set, and we're getting notified in a bunch of different ways since this is a demo environment, but we can see our notification here. Now, the process for Azure is going to be nearly identical, right? So it's going to occur in this same window here under the posture management module in the continuous posture tab. And we're going to select add policy. And remember, we're going to do it just by environment this time. And instead of selecting AWS, in this case, we're going to select Microsoft Azure. So I'll click next here. And let's say I want to tie my Azure prod subscription to a particular rule set. In this case, CloudGuard best practices rule set. We can see that subscription identifier here as well. I'll click next. And once again, we're just going to be looking for that CloudGuard best practices rule set, which we can see right here. So we have our Azure prod subscription tied to the Azure CloudGuard best practices rule set. And we can actually reuse that same notification or create another one, right? But if we tie this particular notification that we made earlier that's sending those scheduled reports every week, we'll get those weekly reports for our AWS environment and our Azure environment using this particular notification. After we've tied that subscription to the rule set and the rule set to the notification, we can simply click Save, and we're done. And now we can get our weekly scheduled reports, our daily scheduled reports, monthly or every hour if we wanted to. We can get those scheduled reports out sent to the emails that we inputted into the field within the notifications. Now, if we don't want to wait that long, of course, we can run these rule sets ad hoc as well. And just to give you a quick example of that, if I search for CloudGuard here and I select that best practices rule set, I'll be able to see all of the individual rules that are comprised in this rule set. Now, there's 961 different rules here. We won't dive into exactly how these rules are created, maybe in another session. But for each one of these rules, we're going to get a description of what we're looking for in remediation steps as well. But if we want to just run this assessment ad hoc and get our results immediately, we can always navigate to this particular rule set and simply click Run Assessment. And then we can identify which particular cloud account we want to run the assessment against. In this case, I'll select AWS prod, and then I can click Run. And this is going to run it in an ad hoc mode, but right, lots of things are going to change in the cloud. So it's best to set up those continuous posture compliance to be able to gather the information that's dynamically changing in the cloud, right? Because if I run this rule set right now at 12:52 p.m., things could be drastically different at 1:15 p.m. So that's why it's always best practice to set up those continuous posture policies. Now that I've ran this in an ad hoc mode, I basically get a snapshot of where my environment was on February 17th at 12:52 p.m. because that's when I clicked run on the assessment. Now, this is going to be useful for gathering that information immediately, but if we want to get those reports, that's why we set up the continuous posture policies. So we have two options there. We can either run these ad hoc or in the continuous posture policy to be able to get notified of our non-compliant assets. So that really encompasses everything I wanted to cover in this particular piece here. We Just to summarize, we covered onboarding both AWS and Azure environments, and then tying those environments to certain rule sets within continuous posture, and then creating notifications off those continuous posture policies to be able to send out scheduled reports to the users that need to see them. So with that being said, thanks for watching this, and look forward to the results. Thanks.